Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe. President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet has approved the Constitutional 18th Amendment Bill for public comment, which will give recognition to South Africa's sign language now, as this will become the 12th official language of the country. This comes after the Department of Basic Education announced that it will incorporate sign language as an option in the school curriculum in its annual budget speech this month. South African Sign Language has been mooted as an official language for a number of years, with a Parliament committee proposing its adoption in 2020. Whilst the amendment bill has not been published, it's set to include an amendment of Section 6 of the Constitution and the national official languages, recognising the South African Sign Language as the 12th official language. According to the Western Cape government, South African Sign Language has its own grammatical structure, independent of any spoken or written language. And the majority of deaf people are born to hearing parents and therefore don't acquire South African Sign Language as a mother tongue. Instead, they acquire language at school from peers, and South African Sign Language is the first language of the majority of South African deaf children. Well, to talk a little bit more about this, we're now joined by Lance Schultz, who's the CEO of the Pan-South African Language Board, PanSALB, and sign language interpreter Fortune Madlala. Lance, thanks very much indeed for joining us. This must be great news. It's taken time, but I guess it's been good to fight for.
A very good evening to you, Peter, and your viewers. And I think let me also at this time give a special welcome also to your deaf viewers. It certainly is a time in the making in terms of getting this passed. I think important to note is that this really does reaffirm the democratic right of deaf persons to participate in a meaningful and substantive way in public life by using their own language. You've prefaced everything correctly, and I think just one thing we need to recognize that deaf people, it comes from children from childbirth. We have some of them that is impacted and affected, and it goes into their adult life. And for us, this is a good opportunity now to level the playing field. And as we know, it provides then access to socioeconomic resources and the improvement in terms of how they communicate between deaf and non-deaf people in South Africa. So I think this is a significant step, and we should be very, very proud of what we have achieved through the President's announcement today.
And I suppose we can also be extra proud because not a lot of countries in the world recognize sign language as an official language. I believe Uganda led the way in 1995, but only a handful of countries have taken this path since then.
Indeed, correct. And if we look across Africa, there are very few countries, even within the diaspora. And so South Africa, I think, are going to play a significant role. We have got partnerships also with some other countries on a country-to-country level. And they have also indicated that they'll be watching how we evolve to take the best practice that we adopt so that they can follow suit as well. So I think important also that this is not going to guarantee that all of the changes is just going to manifest itself. As the Pan-South African Language Board, we're going to have to implement very stringent language policies, as well as practices that would have to be adopted to make access and information much easier from the schooling system all the way through to the manner in which society actually communicates in this regard.
All right, you've given us some clues already for my next question. What does official language status mean?
All right, so what it means is that effectively now it is provided for in the Constitution, and that departments, our schooling systems have to start introducing programs to ensure that people from the deaf community get provided with access to translation, also the interpretation services that they will have to be afforded. We do know also that when people go into public facilities, they often battle by not having access to persons that can communicate to them in this very particular vernacular, they will have to now be provided with those resources also. So I think the engagement across the public sector as well as the private sector is going to play a pivotal role to ensure that we ramp this up. And of course, as PanSALB, our constitutional obligation is to monitor these policies and ensure that they are effectively implemented throughout the length and breadth of our country.
And I think people need to understand that it is a language. This isn't just gesturing. This has got its own structure, and it's not a question of trying to find equivalents in English and so on and so forth. Sometimes you need a few gestures to say one word in English, and sometimes one word in English needs a few gestures, I guess.
Yes, of course. And you can understand that we've got such a rich heritage with 11 languages, and often things can get lost in translation. So the type of symbols and signs that gets used needs to be seen in terms of the origins that it's got from all of our languages. And of course, that makes it much richer in terms of appreciating South African Sign Language in its context. I think important just to point out to your viewers as well is that we've got distinct differences, but we've also got distinct similarities with the international sign language community. But of course, we've got the nuanced differences in terms of the manner in which the formation of the letters, the consonants and the vowels comes through.
All right, so when we say South Africa Sign Language, it literally is a South African language.
Absolutely, and it needs to be appreciated and respected. And that's why we say that this protection of the linguistic rights should extend in its full form to the users of SA Sign Language, and ensuring that they no longer suffer the type of prejudice and limited access to resources which historically they have been deprived of.
All right, you mentioned the school system. Does that mean that maybe hearing children can learn sign language as well? Will it be taught? Is that something that's planned for downstream?
I think we need to be pragmatic about the rollout of sign language. It's going to take a number of systemic measures that would have to be introduced. There needs to be engagement with the Department of Basic as well as Higher Education in terms of how this is going to be rolled out. As I stressed at the onset, we will be looking at inculcating a set of language policies and practices. There will have to be engagement also within the various departments through the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture to ensure that we've got concurrence and that we've got a rollout. So I believe that we will be putting this into these very distinct set of policies which we're going to be working on in the coming period.
You mentioned that it comes with rights. Does that mean in the future, once this bill is signed, is that the deaf community can demand to be heard, demand to have access, where perhaps it might not always have been there?
Yeah, so in effect, what the bill will do is it will allow now for them to have a platform in which they can ventilate if they feel that their civil rights is being violated. That will then be enshrined in terms of the Section 6 of the Constitution, and they will have rights in terms of that and recourse, and PanSALB will have to ensure that it investigates these matters and that it gets brought, appropriate remedial measures gets taken.
All right, so where are we at the moment? It's out for public comment. What happens in those 30 days, and then what happens after that?
All right, it will then be gazetted by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. That will then go back into Cabinet. Cabinet will then convene and take into account also all of the public comments. And that will then go through in terms of it being incorporated as the change to the Constitution.
All right, this public comment phase is quite important, isn't it? Just remind our viewers why we should be paying attention.
All right, I think importantly that we are now giving absolute official status to a new language in our country. We're giving recognition also to people that have been deprived of resources. And what we are doing is we are creating an opportunity for non-deaf people to get closer access in terms of programs so that they can also start learning how to actually sign. There's a number of very successful programs. One of it is at Wits University, and we will encourage people to start learning so that we can incorporate them into our broader society. So I think very significant, also because of the leadership role then that South Africa will play on the African continent in terms of how we're rolling this out, so that this can also then be done in our sister countries.
All right. I mean, it has a lot of practical implications, as you were saying. I'm in the rural areas and I go to a government building. I'm deaf. I should be able to get someone to help me, right?
Absolutely. And we are going to be ensuring that we play a much more constructive oversight role to ensure that all of these departments have got people in their facilities that can provide that. Currently, what we have done is we've worked with a number of departments to ensure that there are at least sign language posters that are put up to ensure that there can be some minimum communication. This year will allow us now to take it to the next level to ensure that we've got human capital that can actually provide interpretation as well as the necessary translation services within these departments. So that is the significant step, so that, as you are pointing out, and it's not only in the rural areas, even in the built-up areas, we find that often the complaints that comes through is they do not have access to people that can communicate with them. So this will allow us that opportunity for enforcement, so that we can give them access to people to communicate with.
All right. Will that spill over to the private sector, banks and other institutions, that they must provide this service and this help?
Absolutely. The details of that I cannot comment at this stage until we have seen what the final bill and what are the inclusions that is in there. But I would believe that it does include the private sector also, because people essentially in their day-to-day lives do access those facilities also, and it will be incumbent on both to ensure that we provide access to these resources in its entirety.
Lance Schultz, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Great news, very exciting, that South African Sign Language is now to be a 12th official language in the country, and with all the rights that come with it. Thanks so much indeed for highlighting this development for us.
Thank you, and a good evening to you.
Good night. All right, so that was Lance Schultz, the CEO of PanSALB, talking about sign language South African Sign Language becoming the 12th official language of the country. Great news indeed.